Good evening and welcome to this presentation on identity and the challenge of disability. I am Barbara Gagliotti and I'm an educator and the Associate Director of Crossroads Cultural Center in Washington, D.C. And I'm pleased to welcome our guests on behalf of New York Encounter. His Eminence, Cardinal Jean O'Malley, Archbishop of Boston, is a dear friend of New York Encounters. The last time he was on this stage was with our beloved Monsignor Albacete just 1 year ago. And we had a fitting tribute to him last night. To my left is Timothy Shriver. He is an educator, a social activist, an entrepreneur, and he is the head of Special Olympics, an organization which he just told me now numbers more than 5 million athletes in 170 countries throughout the world. He is He is also the author of the best-selling book, Fully Alive, Discovering What Matters Most. And congratulations on your book and welcome to New York Encounter.
Thank you.
Our third guest will be joining us via pre-recorded video interview, and that is Jean Vanier. Some call him a living saint. He is the founder of the L'Arche Communities, a network of people living with people with disabilities. And he could not be with us this evening, but he did graciously consent to give an interview, an exclusive interview to New York Encounter, which we will see in a second. Our discussion this evening hopes to open the question of human limits and vulnerability, and to challenge somewhat the prevailing image of the self-made man and self-sufficiency as the paragon of human achievement. So we're going to watch the interview now with Jean Vanier, and I think there is no better person to speak about vulnerability and the resource that it is. And when we're finished with that, we'll come back and have a conversation with our guests.
This year, New York's Encounter deals with the issue of identity, the search for the human face. A challenge for all of us, and we tend to think an even greater challenge for people with disabilities, although perhaps they have something to teach us. Jean Vanier has shared most of his life with people with intellectual disabilities and has created many communities that provide a place for people to more fully develop their humanity. He has agreed to answer a few questions and to share with all of you gathered in New York his experience of the quest for identity in these extraordinary circumstances. In your opinion, what is the fullness of human life, and how has living with people with disabilities taught you that?
The heart and the center of the human being is the individual conscience. In the Bible, they talk about the heart as being the center. But the individual conscience is something very special. It's the capacity of the human being to recognize love and to seek truth and to seek justice. It's what Mahatma Gandhi would talk about, the little inner voice. The little inner voice. Now, what is the mysterious, even with people with severe disabilities, they recognize that they are loved. You might say that some people with autism, it's more complex. Yes, let's not get into realities where there are some rather more complex realities about communication. How does a man with autism know that he is deeply respected and deeply loved? There's something in the child. The child knows whether he is loved. It's the eyes, it's the smile, it's a whole way of being. It's about tenderness, to approach people tenderly. That is a quality of touch. And that reveals to people, you are precious. By the way I look at him, you can look at people from above You can look at people from below, or you can look at people just, you are you. We welcomed here, and I lived with him for a whole year, Eric, who was blind, who was deaf, who could not walk. He had very severe disabilities, and he had been in a psychiatric hospital for many years. He had been put in hospital when he was 2. His mother never visited him because she was too shocked. She was living off shock to have a child like that. So what is the role of L'Arche? It's to reveal to Eric, you are more beautiful than you dare believe. Because otherwise, he's in anguish. Who is he? Nobody wants him. Nobody loves him. He has been humiliated. Yes, there have been doctors and all sorts of good people, but who wants to live? So the whole reality of L'Arche is that we live together. And Eric, we had to learn giving him his bath, holding him in our arms, and communication through body. And this is somewhere the whole story. The Word became flesh. God became flesh to communicate through the body, through touch, and through a touch of tenderness. Tenderness is a way of listening without judging, without condemning. You see, the heart of the mystery of Christianity is, be compassionate as my Father is compassionate. Do not judge, do not condemn, forgive. So somewhere it's the communication that you are precious. And it's through that communication that Eric will discover he is someone. Also, the assistants, they can come wanting to do good to people. And they have their diplomas, they're good people, they come in a culture where it's good to be good and so on. But it's not that's the question. It's to become a friend, to enter into a relationship, to look into the eyes, to touch people tenderly. So people with disabilities teach assistants what it means to be human. And to be human is to live tenderly and kindly. And the mystery of people with disabilities is they are seen at the bottom of humanity, of being no good. So people come as assistants, they have to change. They have to change, they have to discover that that person with disabilities is precious. And through giving the baths and so on, of course, we have many in L'Arche who are capable and who are doing things, but some also are severely disabled. So a meeting is something special. And I say that if Jesus calls us to eat together is somewhere to have fun, to eat well, to drink well, when to give a meal. And Jesus says, if you do eat with the rejected, those who have been pushed to the periphery, then you shall become blessed. It's not the people with disabilities that see themselves as blessed. You will become blessed because things will change within you. You will discover that the secret of humanity is that we enter together into the human family, and each person is precious. And St. Paul even says that those who are the weakest are necessary to the body, which is the church.
What hampers or allows the growth of the human person? Is there anything particular about this process for people with disabilities?
First of all, it's a long road to grow in love. St. Paul says, what is love? In the 13th chapter of Corinthians, the first letter, he says, love is patience. Love is service. Love is to believe all, hope all, believe all, excuse all. And that doesn't come naturally. To be patient, you have to be in a situation where there is impatience. I mean, we welcomed some years ago Pauline, who was had one arm paralyzed, a leg paralyzed, epileptic, but she was incredibly violent. And why was she violent? She had lived 40 years of humiliation in school, in the streets, in her family. Her family didn't want her like that. So to become human is to welcome the other who is different, because he or she is a human person. But it takes time, because we have to change. You see, we're in a culture of success and a culture of power, a culture of winning. And it's not a question of being better than you. I'm a person. I'm capable of love. You too. So we can meet. That is the beauty of the human face. The human face, in some way, is the revelation through your eyes, through your smile, that you are human. How to grow in that? It's not by reading books. It's not by doing good theology. It's doing what Pope Francis says. Go to the periphery. Go to the extreme limits, and there become a friend of the poor. And there discover that they will evangelize you, and discover also, if you listen, you will discover the wisdom of the poor. That wisdom of the poor can be those who are in the slum areas in Thailand or wherever it is. Somewhere, because we're in a culture of power. My group is the best group, I know. But to be human, it's not a question of I know more than you. To be human is that I can listen to you. That means that something has happened inside of me where I'm able to really be open to the other who is different. The difference of people with disabilities. But that difference could be in the slum areas. It could be in the broken areas of New York. How many people go into the broken areas of New York just to listen to people? What is your story? Tell me your story. I remember one of the people of L'Arche worked with people in prostitution in Australia. And she told me this story. That one day she was in the park of Sydney, and she met a young man whom she had followed a bit, accompanied, and he was dying of a overdose. And he said to her, just the last words, "You've always wanted to change me. You have never met me." And to meet a man who's been caught up in prostitution, tell me your story. And you'll find that he has had a story of pain, rejected by his parents, in a gang, and all sorts of things. Nobody has really listened to his story. And it's when we begin weeping together, then we can start really discovering the mystery. Mother Teresa, she started welcoming people who were dying. She didn't teach them. She took them in her arms, because it is through the body that you reveal that you are loved. Through a touch, through the eyes, through the face. It's the whole physical reality. Not to do something for, but to be with. So it was the touch of Mother Teresa on these people in the streets that revealed to them that they were important. So what we discover is that when we are with people who have been seriously rejected, pushed aside, that as we enter into a relationship, we are changed. And that is the story, which also means, do we want to change? Do we want to be transformed? Do we want to discover that the only thing that is important is to love people, not just to teach them, but to discover their beauty as human beings?
Limits of any types are usually viewed in our society as obstacles to freedom. How does your experience challenge this common belief?
Limits. We're all so limited. You know, we were born as tiny babies, and we will die as very fragile people. And the history of each one of us is to grow from littleness to gradually to discover who we are and what it means to be a human being, and then we start going downhill. I mean, I'm 86 now, but come and see me in 5 years' time, I probably won't be speaking. So there's something about to be limited is to be human. To be illimited is to be God. And so the danger of people is to think they're God. But they're crazy. You know, it's that man in the gospel who said, I'm going to build up my barn and everything. And then God says, you're nuts. You know, you're going to die tonight. We can have a cancer that springs forth. What does it mean to be human? It's to love. And to love, we need to be loved. We need to live a relationship to live a relationship. And we all know that if a child has been abused as a child and violated sexually or physically, we know that that child will be in danger of not being able to grow humanly until maybe the day of their death. Maybe the day of their death they will discover something. So, to be limited is to be human. To be vulnerable is to be human. Because all of us, this night, we can have a diagnosis of cancer or something. And all of us, we know that at a particular moment, we will die. And that is the story of what it means to be a human being, to go from a sentiment of being able to do things to the deep understanding that we're all broken. We need help. We need to be loved. And as we fall into the period of sickness, we need help. We need love. We need kind, competent doctors. We need good nurses. We need a loving family. We need a community. We need to be together. And of course, the problem of humanity today is a highly individualistic, but we've lost the sense of community. And community is not just a group of people living together in a cloister. Community is about coming together for a mission. And the community of L'Arche is, we have a mission. And that mission is to reveal to people, however deep their disabilities, that they are precious, and then discover that as we do that, we are changed. So for that person that I spoke about in Australia, to listen to that man who has been in prostitution, you need a community. If you're all alone, you're not going. We all need together, to be together, to give support to each other, to love each other, to sense that each one of us, we have a place in the body of Christ. And St. Paul says that those who are the weakest are absolutely necessary to the body of Christ. Because when we are weak, we say, I need your help. And it's until we say, I need your help, I cannot do it alone, then we become human. When we think we're God, when we think we have all the power, when we think we have all the knowledge and everything. No, humanity is to become weak, to discover one's gifts, but then also to discover, I need your help.
Just a quick word of thanks to Paolo Silvano, who helped us with that interview in France. Your Eminence, we heard Jean Vanier speak of the wisdom of the poor. And you have spent a considerable amount of time living and working among the poor in Washington, D.C., and in the Virgin Islands, and now in Boston, where I just read a month ago that the poverty level is at its highest in Massachusetts, and it's been in the 1960s. Can you share with us some of the wisdom of the poor?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I want to say how pleased I am to be here today. And last year, I was on the stage with Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete, and I never imagined that it would be the last time we would be here together. But it's an honor to be back here, and I know that at this encounter you're honoring his legacy and his memory, and I'm happy to be back to be a part of that. And you know, it is very moving listening to the testimony of Jean Vanier. It's the second time that I have seen this interview. He's certainly a man whose faith has transformed him and allowed him to have a vision of humanity and our connectedness with God and with one another. And he is just such a gift to the church and to the world. And we're also very honored to be with Tim Shriver, who, like Father Vanier, is so involved in work with the disabled. And I was privileged to know Tim's parents, and I met him when he was 13 years old because we invaded his house with scores of farm workers to have a mass there with Cesar Chavez, and he remembers the confusion. And but no, the poor have very much to teach us. There's no doubt about that. And when I was bishop in Fall River, we took on a parish in Honduras, in a very poor rural parish. And every year we would send groups of students down from the university with the chaplain there to work in the parish. And when they would come back, I would always meet with them. And I'd say, well, what did you think of your experience in Guaymaca? And they said, oh, Bishop, we never saw such poverty. I mean, you know, people living in those shacks and dirt floor, no running water, no schools, working so hard in the fields, and no cars or television sets, and they're so happy. I mean, this was what amazed the young people from Massachusetts in this third world experience. Certainly anyone who has the privilege of working very close to the poor sees how often their sense of values is so much different from the sort of bourgeois way that we look upon things in the United States. First of all, in 20 years in Washington working with immigrants from Central America, I was always so really struck by how these people came to America, worked so hard, and some of them sent half of their earnings back to relatives in their country to support them. And in many of the countries in Central America, the largest part of the gross national product is the money that's being sent back by these immigrant families who are doing minimum wage jobs or less. And in those same homes, you see that there would always be room for someone else. If a child's parents died, there was always a family would take them in, or if another immigrant were coming from their village and had no place to stay, they were welcome to stay in their apartment and share the little food and resources that they had. And so there is an openness to life and a generosity and the primacy given to relationships when people are not surfeited with material things. And I think there's a very strong witness that we can see in that in our lives.
Tim, your mother was Eunice Kennedy Shriver. She was the sister of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Senators Robert and Ted Kennedy. And she was the driving force behind Special Olympics. As early as the 1960s, she opened your house to people with disabilities and Camp Shriver. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. But what motivated her to do that kind of work?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is her own sister. But before I talk about her sister, my Aunt Rosemary, I also would like to acknowledge Your Eminence and, of course, Jean Vanier, who is a personal hero to me and to my wife Linda and to our children. We visited him and in his community on 4 or 5 different occasions. A living saint is, of course, sometimes overused, but I'm sure there are many living saints even in this room, and I don't mean that in a cavalier way, because there are. But the witness of Jean Vanier, a lifetime of commitment to the importance of relationship, to the practice of unconditional love, to the patient exercise of community and compassion, is quite extraordinary. Normally when I give a talk, there's about 30 or 40 people in the room, so I think, Your Eminence, if you don't mind, I'd like to have you come with me in the future. I think I'll sell a lot more books. Probably not realistic, but it's a nice idea anyway. All the proceeds from the book go to Special Olympics, so you don't have to worry about conflicts. Anyway, in trying to capture in my own way my own experience with people with intellectual differences over the course of my own life, 20 years, our marriage, the raising of children, I kept finding myself being told, "Oh, that's so nice that you do that work. It's so wonderful. You're such a good man, so kind. Isn't that wonderful the way you help them?" And those kinds of comments revealed to me that many people misunderstood the revolutionary nature of the work, transformative nature of the engagement, of the connection, of the relationship, even the distinction between them and us, between those with disabilities and those of us who do not have disabilities. How many people in this room don't have vulnerabilities or weaknesses? How many people would be proud to have those be your label, by which you were introduced to everyone in the world, the one most vulnerable part of you? Let me label you that and put it on your birth certificate. This is who you are, a person with this vulnerability. Let me put it on your school forms. Let me put it everywhere you go. It is in some ways violence that we do in separating ourselves from one another with these terms even though we use them for convenience and often with good intention. Our own scriptural tradition begins with a very important dimension of creation, which is that in the beginning God creates and God sees what God has created. God does not distinguish between the good things God created and the not so good things, the strong things and the weak things, the beautiful things and the ugly things, the rich things and the poor things. No, God looks on all the things that God has created and says they're good. Later on, we find Adam and Eve cowering in fear. Later on, we find someone saying, I'm afraid I'm naked. But God doesn't say that. God doesn't tell us to be afraid of being naked. God doesn't tell us that we're disabled, old, fat, poor, weak, vulnerable. This is in some ways, a long history that we're trying to overcome in healing this sense in which those who have some form of difference are in some way different from those of us, that there is even a them and an us. There really is only an us. I mean, if there's one lesson of religious life, in my view, of religious practice, it is that there is only us. There is no them. In my mother's family, sorry for the long introduction, Barbara, but in my mother's family, 9 children raised in Boston, to an Irish Catholic family filled with faith, filled with devotions in the traditional Irish sense, daily attendance at Mass, devotions to the saints, practice of the Rosary, all these kinds of things, but also a tremendously competitive, ambitious group of human beings. Didn't actually end. But in that, I mean, I just have to think at some level the hand of the Holy Spirit works here, because into that very competitive environment comes someone who, so to speak, cannot keep up. My mother would say, my father would ask us all at the dinner table, well, what did you think of today? And we'd go around, and Joe and Kathleen and Jack and Eunice and Rosemary. And of course, Rosemary couldn't answer the way her brothers and sisters could. And she would be skipped over. And then they would look for the church to come through with some kind of explanation or school, and the church was responsive, but there was nothing for Rosemary. My mother would say this almost like a victim of post-traumatic stress, even into her 80s. She would remember her mother picking up the phone and then putting it down and saying, you know, there's nothing for Rosemary, nothing, nothing, nothing. And into that experience of tremendous isolation, fear, a culture so full of values that devalue someone who speaks more slowly, who learns differently, who doesn't run as fast or work as quickly or perform as brilliantly. They kept her at home and said, Rosemary's your sister, you include her. Rosemary's your sister, you include her. And I have to think, to be honest, that Barbara mentions, of course, President Kennedy and Senators Robert and Ted Kennedy. These are very prominent, of course, members of my family. But almost no one knows the leaven in their lives, the ways in which they learned, to the extent they did, the art of politics is the art of extending the boundaries of inclusion. The art of politics is breaking down boundaries of hate and fear based on race, based on poverty, based on disability. The things that they're known for, President Kennedy in particular, most known for, is asking people to give of themselves to others. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do. Where did he learn it? Where did he learn to have the confidence to say to 200 million people, I need your help? I don't think he learned it from studying the British politicians. I don't think he learned it from Lincoln or from his own experience in the war. I think he learned it from Rosemary. I think he learned it from the faith that taught him to include Rosemary and the sure sense that when he included her, when he welcomed her, when he sailed with her, he got something quite beautiful in return, which is the sense that he was loved unconditionally. I have to believe that as wonderful as my grandparents were, they drove their children. And as children often do, they probably confused how hard they had to work with how lovable they were, how much they had to perform with how good they were. Rosemary would not have evaluated her sisters, or she certainly didn't evaluate me when I came home from school with a C+ on a test. It didn't matter to her. You know, if I had just missed the cut on the varsity team, it didn't matter to Rosemary. I could sit with her and play cards and sit at dinner, and we both would sit there all so excited that dessert was about to come. And it didn't matter. There was a sense in which we were at one.
So let's see if we can go a little bit deeper into this question of vulnerability and limitedness that both of you have spoken about, and certainly Jean Vanier spoke about it in the interview. What have you learned about your own identity in dealing with situations of vulnerability or your own vulnerability?
She's looking right at me.
I'm going to ask the Cardinal, and you're going to come back to you.
I want to just make sure that the Cardinal isn't. I've just spoken for a long time, so I wanted to. I'm scared up here. What can I tell you?
Well, I have more vulnerabilities, so I'll. No. When I was in school and I was young, probably because in my family there was not anyone with Down syndrome, that as a child I was sort of afraid, and I didn't know how to react when you would meet someone with Down syndrome. And we had some very good friends who were active in the Catholic Worker, and they took me to visit a family, the Goshaw family, Bill and Dorothy Goshaw, who were very good friends of Dorothy Day. They had 6 children, and they started the Catholic Worker movement in Cleveland, and they had a farm in Avon, Ohio. And on their farm, they had a large house, and they took children in whose parents were unable to cope with the disabilities that they had. And many of them were very severely deformed, with very severe brain damage. And it was, to me, kind of shocking when I first saw all of these children. But then after being with this family for a couple of hours, I realized that these children were like a love bomb that had landed in the middle of their family. And they had learned to love in such a special way because of these children. These children were teaching them their own humanity and how to relate. And it was a transformative moment in my life. And I was privileged to be with the Holy Father last year when he went to Assisi. And Pope Francis, who speaks in gestures all the time, it's just amazing. The first place that he wanted to visit was the Istituto Serafico, which is a hospital for children with Down syndrome and other kinds of physical and mental ailments. And the Holy Father wanted his pilgrimage in Assisi to begin there, and I thought afterwards, it's so appropriate because St. Francis's conversion, as he describes in his last testament, takes place as a young man when he is confronted by someone with leprosy. And Francis had this almost terrible phobia, and whenever he would see a leper, he would just run in the other direction. And this particular day, the grace of God touched his heart, and he got off his horse, went over to the leper, he kissed him, he gave him all of his money, gave him his clothes. And later on, before he died, when he's writing about his life, he said, that was the moment. That was the moment. Everything before that had seemed bitterness was changed into sweetness.
Yeah, so beautiful.
And that was his conversion. And so for the Holy Father to choose the Instituto Serafico as the beginning of his visit to Assisi, and he read a letter there that he had received, I think, when he was Archbishop in Buenos Aires, a letter which I wrote a little quote here from it. It says, "Dear Francis, I am Nicholas. I am 16. I cannot write to you directly because I don't speak and I don't walk. I've asked my parents to write this letter. I received my first communion when I was 6, and now I'm preparing for confirmation, something that makes me very, very happy. Every night since you asked for it, I pray to my guardian angel, who is called Eusebius, and who is very patient." The Holy Father went on to talk about the children there. He said, these children are like the wounds on Christ's body. When the resurrected Lord came back, all of the wounds were, so much of it was healed, but the wounds of the nails were still there, and he showed those as a sign of his love. And the Holy Father said, and then after all of these Easter apparitions where the risen Lord shows these wounds, he takes those wounds up to heaven. He said, these children are like those wounds. And when we're in contact with them, we're in contact with Christ's wounds in heaven. And as people of faith, I think we have to see each other differently. And as Jean Vanier, living at large, has made this such an important part of the message that he brings to us. It will change everything that is bitter into sweetness.
I guess I'll just maybe answer your question, Barbara, from the point of view, which I will try to share with all of you in a way. I came to the Special Olympics movement thinking I was coming to help. So much of what gets confusing in religion is morality and ethics tend to be perceived as exhortations, as duties, obligations, things you're supposed to do. Ought. You ought to be a good boy or a good girl. You ought to help the poor. You ought to give money. I found all of a sudden, and I won't go through the whole story because it's a long one, that was all wrong, that there was no ought in the gospel. And here's how I discovered it. After a while, watching people with intellectual challenges and differences, I'll invite you to participate in this exercise a little bit. Imagine that behind me is a track, and you're sitting in bleachers, and we're at well, it's not a cold day like today, it's a nice warm day. You've got your coffee or your newspaper, and you're watching a race. You've chanced upon a high school track, and there's a Special Olympics event going on, and there's parents scattered about the stands, and you're there together with them. And then you look down towards the starting line, and you see 6 or 8 youngsters lined up, maybe 12, 14 years old, and they're getting ready to run their race. And you pause and just sort of maybe have a moment of self-awareness where you recognize that maybe the 12-year-old who catches your eye down on that track, who has Down syndrome, you know that when she was born, and her mom or her dad said to the doctor, "Is the baby okay?" The doctor probably said, "We're not sure." And you know that when that little girl was trying to walk, it took her longer, and all the other moms were saying, "My baby's walking at 10 months or 12 months, and maybe this little girl didn't walk until 18 or 20 months." And you know that when they looked for child care, most of the child care centers said, "No, I'm sorry, we don't have a program." And you know that the school said the same thing, maybe a special program, maybe not. You know that she grew up, as one parent told me, never being invited to the birthday parties. And she's down on that track. And you can imagine that she's trained for her moment to run her race, and she gets in her lane, and the starting gun goes off. And down the track she runs behind me, and keeping her arms striding as she's been taught by her coach, and going through to the finish line, and she comes in third. And she turns up into the stands near you, and you can hear her mother screaming, "Hey, congratulations!" And her arms go up in the air, third place. And after a while, I all of a sudden started to see that I wanted to be like her. I wanted to be that unafraid to do my best. I wanted to be able to come in third if that was as fast as I could run and still have my mother cheer for me. I wanted to be able to put my arms up and be unafraid of what anybody thinks. That this is who I am. This is my race. I've just won it. And if you think to yourself, you don't think I'm a winner, then you don't understand winning. And if you think I came in third and that's not as good as second, then you don't understand what it means to do your best. You don't understand excellence. You don't understand dignity. You don't understand love. You don't understand joy. You don't understand anything, and that was me. I really don't think I understood any of those until I finally took seriously that she won a medal. Sometimes people say to me, "Do you go, Tim, to the real Olympics?" Boston's bidding for the real Olympics, right? And I always used to say, no, I mean, sometimes I do, but, we have a good, it was sort of a bureaucratic answer. And then I had to stop and think after a while. Do I go to the real Olympics? You bet I do. You bet I do. And if I take seriously, I think of if I take seriously that medal that she won, that you just watched her win, is a real Olympic medal, I have to change everything. if it's just a symbol, if it's just a symbol of goodness or greatness, then I'm a liar. If I really think she's just as gifted, beautiful, strong, and wise as anybody else in this room, as anybody else I've ever met, as any Nobel laureate, as any politician or CEO, then I have to change everything. And in this way, I think of Flannery O'Connor, whose own reflections on the Blessed Sacrament, at one point, I think the quote is, and someone said to her, well, don't you think it's just a symbol? And I think her response was, if it's a symbol, then to hell with it. Because it's a lie. But if it's real, that's something to believe in. That's something to transform and change your life. So I think, I love when Pope Francis invited the church to see itself as a field hospital, because I spent a lot of time on fields. And we are, in some respects, we arc towards a sacramental kind of presence, a presence of opposites, a presence of contrasts, a presence of the divine infused into the human, a presence of complete humanity and yet complete sacredness at the same time. Because we do bring those who are seen as losers. I mean, let's be honest, the reason we are talking about disability is because we're afraid of it. The reason we're here trying to figure out what to do about it is because we don't understand our limitations, as Jean Vanier said. We are afraid of our weakness and our vulnerability. That 12-year-old represents to most of us all the things we're most afraid of. Not being smart in the traditional sense, not being rich in the traditional sense, not being independent in the traditional sense, not being popular in the traditional sense, not having a good business card, not having a good bank account, all those things. That's what she represents. Whether we like it or not, it's true. And until we face that and convert it into a strength that Corinthians speaks of, where the wise are shamed by the weak, until we recognize that as an invitation to discover ourselves, not to do our duty, but to discover our true selves, if you will, as your fellow Franciscan, Your Eminence, Richard Rohr sometimes writes about, until we invite ourselves into that experience of relationship with that which we fear, we will always exclude, we will always say some things are good and some things are not, unlike God. And to the extent we're all trying to get back to God, we have to confront all the things that we're afraid of, because they're all made by God, and they're all where we're headed, in my view.
Okay, so you
Sorry.
lead into the next question that I was going to ask, because what you're saying is something radical. Both of you are suggesting something radical that we are afraid of. But so how is it that we can see our vulnerability and our limitedness as resources for us personally, but also for the world? I mean,
I think one of the biggest deficiencies of our modern culture is the extreme individualism. Professor Putnam has that great book, Bowling Alone, where he documents how each generation of Americans is becoming more isolated, more alone, more individualistic, joining less with others, and people living alone, eating alone, and the whole phenomenon of the autonomous self, where the individual becomes so absorbed in himself that he really loses touch with others. And I think to really understand our humanity is to understand our interdependence. And Jean Vanier alluded to that when he said, no matter how strong and healthy anyone is, there's periods in your life when you are completely dependent on the goodwill and the love of other human beings. and particularly for the first years of your life, and very probably for the last years of your life. And but that interdependence is what makes us human, that we're not autonomous selves, that we are connected to each other, and in our own limitations are a way of sharing in that common humanity and feeling responsible for one another. And I think that's a very important lesson to be learned in any kind of reflection around these issues.
Yeah, and I don't think vulnerability, I don't think we have to glamorize vulnerability beyond its presence in all of our lives. It is pretty close to the surface almost all the time. We're afraid of it. I don't think we have to glamorize it. I think the reason why so much of our tradition and so much of our experience is afraid of it is because it exposes us to one another. It exposes us in some respects as being like the other. It doesn't allow us to build a wall. We're not better. You know, in the end of the day, no one's better. I'm sorry to say it, but it's true. We spend a lot of time trying to be better. Churches do this, political institutions do this, businesses do this. We try to elevate and make someone give the appearance of being better than someone else. It's not true. It's a lie. No one's better. And vulnerability reminds us of that at some level. I think you can also see this a lot in the contemplatives. St. Francis's conversion is a great reminder. The sweetness comes from realizing he can get off his horse and no longer be afraid of the vulnerability of the disease. The disease was the demon there, right? The disease, the fear of the disease, the fear of the person. I can't touch that. And so in contemplative experience, I believe, as well as in authentic service experiences, reciprocal experiences, we come to vulnerability as a key. We don't have to spend too much time glamorizing it, but it is a key to our common humanity. It is the inescapable link that we share, right? We maybe have many other things that are different, but that, in moments of silence and in moments of connection, reminds us of our ultimate destiny, I think. I mean, why else do people, again, I'll use my own experience, and these, they look so simple. We run track meets, soccer games, basketball games. What's the big deal? You know, there's nothing theological about it. There's nothing political about it. We don't march on City Hall. We don't throw rocks at organizations that are discriminatory. We just play basketball. But people come and, you know, one story in the book, I'll tell it very quickly, of a little boy, Donald Page, who was born in a small village in Ireland and develops a very serious disease, almost dies 3 or 4 times, but his mom and dad, his dad's a dairy farmer, 8 children, they raise him, ends up in a small school, special needs kids, and very, very significant disabilities. And when the World Games, the Special Olympics World Games were held in Dublin, they arranged to have a demonstration of people, what we call motor activities, people that have such significant limitations they can't compete in traditional sports, but they can do individual activities. So his dad told me that Donald got on the bus at 4 o'clock in the morning to drive to Dublin for the day, and his mom and dad left in separate cars because they wanted Donald to be with his team. And long story short, I end up being invited to go to this particular event. Linda and I and our kids were there the whole week, but I got a call that morning from the president of Ireland's office saying the president would like to come and go to one of the events. Would I accompany her? I said, of course. I'm so thrilled and flattered. And well, she'd like to go to the motor activities. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, we have athletes who are swimming in Olympic times. We have athletes running marathons. I wish I could take her somewhere and she would see these people who are doing these extraordinary things. She'd see how gifted are. Instead, she wants to go to motor activities. Thinking, you know. So here we sit right where you guys are sitting, and we get to the hall, and it's packed, which is the first shock for me. People from all over Dublin had come to watch motor activities, and here comes Donald. He's wheeled out in his wheelchair to the center of a riser about half this height, and in front of him on a table like this is placed a small beanbag. And his job is to perform in front of the president of his country and about 1,500 people like this, to lift the beanbag and move it from one side of the table to the other. And the voice on his coach sort of stands behind him, and his dad's in the audience, dairy farmer, and go. And for about 2 or 3 minutes, Donald can't move his arm. And the place is quiet, and I'm sitting there like you cannot imagine how uncomfortable I am. Like, and here's Donald trying to move his arm, and it's just not going. And he's looking up, he looks around the room, And after about 1.5 minutes, it's a long time, trust me, to sit there in silence with 1,500 people. Wasn't contemplative. His arm starts to move, a little bit. And at 4 minutes, after, a guy in the back, come on, lad, he finally gets his hand onto this beanbag. 4 minutes. And then the crowd starts to cheer. And then the noise starts to build. And this hand moves. 18 minutes it takes him to lift this bag. And the place starts to cheer. The bag gets higher. And all of a sudden, it crosses the midpoint. And the standing and the screaming, you would have thought it was the Final Four and there's 100,000 people, or the finals of the World Cup, Brazil against Argentina, screaming, come on, lad. And I talking to his dad, and he's describing to me, he says, he says, I always told the doctors, just give him a bit of time. Donald can do it. And he puts that thing down, and I thought to myself, I'm looking there, I'm bawling. The president's standing next to me, she's bawling. The whole audience, and I'm thinking to myself, how sad that I was afraid. That here I was lingering in this fear that I had to show off. Still, 15 years into it, that's why I say I'm a slow learner. It takes a long time. We all need a bit of time to learn what it means to change our hearts, to convert ourselves to this possibility that we can redefine human connection, human valuing. I think Donald Page, you think of a country like Ireland and all the things it needs. Peace and good political leadership and economic development and a return to the faith and a stronger church. All these things. I firmly believe it needs all of them. But the person most likely to deliver it, I don't think God, he's a Nobel laureate. Jerry Adams can do a lot of things. The church can do many things, but Donald can do things none of them can do in terms of helping that country find its heart, and did do in those moments. So I think we have to remember that these are invitations, these exhortations to awaken ourselves to the beauty of the human face. Let's not forget we're all, this culture's at war with the human body. Walk up and down the streets here, you'll be told the thousands of things you can do to fix your face, to change it, to color it, to tighten it, to operate on it, to do the rest to the rest of your body too. We are not comfortable in this culture with the human face. How many people stand in front of the mirror and really deeply believe what they're looking at is beautiful? You might say it, but really deeply believe it? Don't you look at it and think to yourself, if only this were, if only this, only this. It would look so much better if I don't think Donald does that.
One last question. We heard Jean Vanier speak about the need to be friends with people who are more vulnerable than we are. And I wanted to ask your experience of friendship. I have in mind particularly Monsignor Albacete, who was not afraid to be vulnerable. Can you tell us about your experience of friendship with him?
Well, friendship is I think what makes us fully alive, to use the name of Tim's book, and not to have friendship is the greatest impoverishment. But as you know, I was thinking about one of my parishioners in Washington who had 5 children, and she had one of her daughters had Down syndrome, and she died when she was like 35. I had the funeral. And after the funeral, the mother said, you know, Padre, I really need to talk to you. And I sat down with her, and she said, you know, when this daughter was born, I was so angry at God. I said, you know, why did this happen to my family? And she said, and then this little girl grew up and taught us all how to love. And my husband died, and my children got married, moved away. And this was the daughter that stayed home with me, and she was my best friend. And now I've lost her. But being friends is what brings joy to our life and our existence, and it's really what makes us human. And our friendships with people who have Down syndrome or other limitations are what makes us human. And I'm glad that Tim mentioned about how our culture has been so caught up in its own ideal and its cult of physical beauty or youth, and it really warps our mind. Pérez Galdós, the Spanish author, has a book called Marianela, and in the book there's this young woman who has a great capacity for friendship and love and goodness, and she has a boyfriend, Pablo, who's blind. And Marianela cooks for Pablo, she washes his clothes, she goes on walks with him, and she's his constant companion. And then Pablo's family sends him off to the big city. He's operated on, cured of his blindness, and comes home. And for the first time in his life, he sees this woman that loves him more than anyone else in the world. But now that he can see, he realizes there are other young ladies prettier than Marianela in the village, and he goes and marries someone else. I mean, the irony is, when he was blind, he could see the goodness, the love, and the beauty. But when he could see with his eyes, he could only see what was on the surface. And this is what our culture is instilling in people. I mean, the eating disorders that exist today, this is a result of people being foisted with this idea that to be beauty you have to be, you know, like Twiggy or something, you know. And so helping us to discover what real beauty is about and helping others to discover the beauty that is in them. And the Holy Father has said, you know, even when we want to teach the faith, we have to begin with the via pulchritudinis, the way of beauty, and that beauty is a reflection of God's eternal beauty, and certainly in friendship, it's one of the most beautiful forms of God's beauty that we have.
Thank you both. We could probably stay here all day and listen to these stories. This is beautiful, but we don't have the time, so well, I'd like to thank everyone for being here.
Ha ha ha.